This is one of those episodes that when I first started collecting houseplants, I tried to watch as many of these videos as I could, which were what mistakes not to make, what things should I avoid doing, how do I make my houseplants love me. So in this episode of my Houseplant Care 101 series, I'm going to be sharing the 15 biggest indoor plant mistakes to avoid and help make your plants love you. I've included timestamps in the description below for everybody, and a huge thank you to our sponsor for this episode, rePotme.com. As you guys know, I'm obsessed with rePotme. They have so many wonderful products. They're a huge resource for the plant community. I'm obsessed with their soils and their planters, and I'll talk a little bit more about them later in the episode. One of the biggest mistakes that you can make that I've found holds me back from time to time is lacking confidence and being afraid of making a mistake when it comes to taking care of my plants or buying a new plant. The most essential thing to know about being someone who loves indoor plants is that none of us, even the experts, get it right all the time. As a general rule, we can't avoid taking chances and trying new things because we are afraid that we might fail. Failure with plants is inevitable, and it really is just a learning opportunity, and I can guarantee you that anyone who has ever owned indoor plants has had countless learning opportunities. Now, as you guys know, I love to go plant shopping. That's my plant therapy, as I call it, and I've learned that there are a lot of mistakes we can make just in plant shopping, and there are mistakes we can avoid that can really set us up as a plant parent for success. A mistake to avoid, if possible, is buying a really small plant. The reason it's controversial is that smaller plants are just so much more affordable. Larger plants have a much more established root system many times, and the smaller plants won't. So if you have a baby plant that just hasn't had the chance to become established yet, and it's going to be a lot more sensitive to any mistakes that you make as a plant parent. So a larger plant is going to be much more forgiving when you take it home out of maybe its greenhouse environment that it's used to, compared to the smaller plant that's going to have a lot harder time adjusting. Now, my next recommendation of mistake not to make is buying clearance plants. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm all about a good deal. You guys know this. And sometimes with clearance plants, they're just trying to get rid of their inventory, and you can really find some good deals. However, be super cautious unless you're really good at rehabbing plants or getting rid of pests. Be super cautious on buying a clearance plant and bringing it home and adding it to your plant collection. While you're there, definitely take the opportunity to look at the roots. Maybe make sure that the plant doesn't have root rot or pests on it, because a lot of times there's a reason why those plants are on clearance. And the last thing I want to do with my plants is bring home a plant that's going to infect my other plants with pests or, die right away. Even if I only spent $10 on it, I don't want that $10 to be, wasted when I could have put that towards a healthier plant. The next mistake to avoid is not knowing what we are buying. Even those of us that have been taking care of plants forever are constantly researching when we bring a new plant home. I would definitely recommend getting to know whatever plant you are bringing home. Each plant is different and has different growing conditions. Now, the main thing we're trying to do as plant parents is to mimic that plant's natural habitat, and that's really easy to find out with a quick, internet search, and just make sure that we're doing everything we can to set that plant up for success. The next mistake to avoid is lazy pest prevention, and this can be done as early as when you are in the shop looking for your plant. I mean, that's a very important step when you are doing some plant shopping, is making sure that's a healthy plant. So just check all the leaves, check the roots if you can. I do this every time I look for a plant now. I'm always checking the leaves, making sure there's no spider mites or little spider mite webs in between. And there's been it's been countless times that I've found a wish list plant that's an amazing deal, and it's my dream plant, and then I look at it and I see some pests and I just put that plant right back because it's just not worth it. Also, when you bring that plant home, wash off the leaves at a bare minimum. This can be an easy step to ignore and not do, because that's the last thing we want to do sometimes, is like mess with plants when we bring them home. I know me, I'm like lazy pest prevention. Like, this is a mistake I've made. That's why I'm like making this video to help other people not make my same mistakes. But yeah, wash off those leaves because there can be eggs on the leaves. And you can also go a step further if you want to. If you're suspicious of it a little bit, you can use insecticidal soap or a little bit of neem. You can also quarantine that plant away from your other plants for, I don't know, 10 days, whatever the hatching cycle is for pests, you know, usually 2 weeks, just to keep an eye on it. And then if it looks good after a couple weeks and you don't see any pests happening, you know, you can introduce it to your plant collection. But I'll tell you what, I've found with pests that getting ahead of the problem is really a lot better than having to deal with the pests when they, you know, make an appearance. This next mistake, I wish I would have known earlier on as a plant parent, because knowing it was a mistake would have saved me so much heartbreak. And it's relying on the leaves instead of the roots. And what I mean by that is letting the leaves tell me how the plant is doing instead of looking at the roots. For instance, I had an Anthurium fingers, well, I still have it, and it looked like a complete goner. It lost literally every leaf, and I thought it was dead. Fortunately, I had it in one of my clear orchid pots that I love from rePotme. You guys know I'm obsessed with those. And I fortunately could see the roots through the pot, and I saw that the roots still looked great. So I just kept watering it. I paid a little bit more close attention to it, gave it a bit more light, and now it's fully come back. It looks amazing. It's so healthy. And it just made me realize I need to pay closer attention to the roots. And I dread to think how many plants I threw away that were probably fine. I just needed to give it another chance, you know. But I didn't use those clear orchid pots until, you know, recently. So also, if a plant is looking a little sad and you're not sure what's going on with it, I recommend looking at the roots, because that will tell you if it's root rot or something like that. You'll be able to treat it more accurately than if you're just looking at the leaves to tell you how it's going. Also, it can be really normal for plants' leaves to turn yellow and die off, especially if the seasons are changing or, you know, for a number of reasons. And it doesn't always mean that something's wrong with the plant. So if the roots are looking good and you're seeing new growth and some of the leaves are dying off, you know, normally that's okay. There usually isn't a super need to panic. The next mistake is incorrect watering, and this is the easiest way I have found to kill a plant. I don't mean overwatering by you give your plant too much water. I mean that plant is left sitting in water or sitting in super saturated soil to where those roots don't have a chance to breathe and they drown, they get root rot. This can be a really easy mistake to avoid. First of all, you want to make sure that the soil is well draining, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And you want to make sure that the planter has a lot of drainage holes, so a lot of opportunity for any excess water to get out of the soil. Plants just do so much better. They're a lot more forgiving of being a little extra thirsty than they are of too much watering. The watering needs of your plant can also change on the season, and a plant might not need as much water during the winter months when it's not actively growing, and maybe a little bit more during the summer months. So definitely always check that your plant needs it first. The next mistake to avoid making is using the incorrect soil for your plant. So one of the things we try to do is replicate the natural environment for those plants. So if we stick a plant in some soil that it's not naturally adapted to, it's going to have a really hard time reaching its potential. Now, this is especially the case with potted plants or indoor plants. Indoor plants are just unable to spread their roots and try to find the right soil that meet the conditions that they need. So that's why it's so important for us as plant parents to provide the right soil for them in the first place. This is going back to our initial research and making sure that we know the right soil that our plant needs. Now, some people get really into custom making their own soils and having the right soil. Now, I'm a simple plant parent, so if I were to make my own soil, I would just recommend to make sure it's well draining, you know, a 50% potting mix and a 50% like orchid bark, perlite mixture, something chunky. Now, I've become addicted to the rePotme.com soil because they actually customize their own soil blends based on the type of plant. So if you go into their houseplant section and it has a section for houseplant soils, you'll see that they have them there. And now I have become so spoiled and I totally rely on them because my plants are just thriving in their soil. They have monstera, philodendron, peace lily, cacti and succulent soil, which is amazing. They have pothos soil, epipremnum. I mean, the list goes on, and they're offering 10% off to Ashley Anita viewers. Just use my code Ashley. Now, I also mentioned their clear orchid pots, which I am totally obsessed with, and they've really saved me a lot of heartache with my plants because I can see the moisture through them even in the bottom of the planter, because a lot of times the top will be dry and then the bottom will still have moisture in the soil. And I can tell all of that with the clear orchid pots. So I've been starting to put all of my plants and repot all of my plants into those slotted orchid pots. I'm totally obsessed, as you all know. Now they also have great houseplant fertilizer, cacti and succulent fertilizer, whether you want organic or synthetic. I mean, they're just a great resource. They have a little bit of everything on their website, and it's so helpful as a houseplant parent to have that one-stop shop that has kind of everything you need. They also have some really beautiful ceramic planters. So yeah, definitely recommend checking them out, going to their website, which I have included in my description below. And again, they are offering 10% off their soils to Plant Life with Ashley and Nita viewers. Just use my code Ashley. I would just really recommend avoiding going with a standard potting mix that you would get from a big box shop, because a lot of times those aren't going to be well draining and they're not going to be well suited to your indoor plants. I did at one time get lazy, like a long time ago, and I didn't have everything that I needed to make my own soils. This was before I was using the rePotme soils, and I used just a regular potting mix, and like all of my plants got root rot and I lost a lot of my plants. Like I ended up having to propagate a lot of them because they were just dying so quickly. So yeah, stay away from just your standard potting mixes that have a lot of water retention. The next mistake to avoid is improper lighting. And the more I'm a plant parent, the more I realize how important correct lighting is for our plants. I mean, as a rule, I would say bright indirect light near a window, but without light shining directly on your plant. Also, I really recommend grow lights. They're amazing. I love all the different grow lights. There's so many different options you can use. So on the opposite side, I've found that some of my plants are getting too much light. I was recently out of town for 2 weeks and the timers on my grow lights weren't working properly, and I didn't have time to mess with it, so I just left them for 2 weeks without the grow lights, and they just got the light from this window, which isn't much for like what these plants I thought needed. And I came back and was so surprised how great my plants did. Like some of them had grown so much more without me blasting them with grow lights. So I think I need to move some of my plants around and maybe lessen the light on some of my plants. The next mistake is no humidity. If you are a plant parent and you have tropical plants and they're not having any humidity, that is a big mistake, especially if you want your plants to thrive and put out big, beautiful leaves. They need that humidity. So ideal humidity conditions are 60% and above. 50% and above can be fine as well. I don't have a humidifier going right now because here in North Carolina we have really great humidity, 60% and above in the summer months. But in the winter time, I do have my humidifier going. The next mistake to avoid is no airflow. And I made this mistake big time when I was first collecting plants. I didn't realize how important it was to have a fan going, to make sure there was airflow happening, and I got fungus all the time, all over my plants. The leaves of my plants were getting like discolored in certain areas, and it was because there was bacteria building on them because I didn't have airflow. So ever since I had a fan going all the time, the problems with all of that went away. You know, if you have a lot of humidity happening, you have water in the soil, not having airflow is a big problem. So I have a fan going all the time. I have some little fans going in my IKEA greenhouse 24/7. That's why when you go into greenhouses, you hear those huge fans going. It's because of how important airflow is. And I didn't realize that when I first started, so lesson learned. The next mistake is one that I'm really bad about, and that is dirty leaves on your plant. So these leaves are the solar panel of these plants, and if they're covered with even a light layer of dust, they're gonna have a really hard time photosynthesizing. So it's just something I'm really bad about that I work on, and it's a mistake that I make, and I know it's a mistake a lot of other people make as well. And a lot of us buy certain plants that are okay in like lower light conditions. And if you have a plant in a lower light condition and it has dust on the leaves, there's no way it's going to have any opportunity to thrive and be healthy and put out new growth. The other thing that's important with cleaning the leaves is it helps prevent pests. Next up is neglecting fertilizing. This was something I was really bad about in the beginning. I was very overwhelmed. with fertilizing. I didn't understand all the numbers and I just was overwhelmed. So to make it easy, I definitely, whatever fertilizer you choose, just make sure it says for houseplants on there, whether you go with organic or synthetic. Fertilizing is very, very important, and I was blown away with how much better my plants did when I started fertilizing them. And, you know, it makes sense. You know, plants that are potted up, they're not like outdoor plants where they can spread their roots and try to find nutrients in the soil. I mean, indoor plants, they're just limited to whatever's in their little pots. As soon as the nutrients run out in their soil, the nutrients run out for the plant. And it can only do so much without proper feeding. Now, the best way to go about it that I've found with fertilizing is to really rigorously follow the instructions on the back and do whatever you can to not over fertilize. You don't want to burn your plant. So I always say start at 50% strength and then slowly add as needed, fertilize through the growing months and taper back, and don't fertilize during the winter months. However, if you do see growth on your plants, like I see a lot of growth on my plants during the winter months because of the conditions in here, I continue fertilizing my plants, but I do it at half strength during the winter months and they love it. Now, incorrect repotting and choosing the wrong pot is something that is easily avoided. Try to only repot a plant if it really needs it, if its roots are crowded, and when you do repot, only go 1 to 2 inches bigger on the pot. Now, if you like changing out pots regularly and you like using decorative pots, use a nursery pot, or I like to use these slotted clear orchid pots, but use a nursery pot. Plant your plant in that and then put that into the cover pots and the decorative pots that you like. That way the plant won't have to go into shock and recover every time that you repot it. If you repot a plant before the plant needs it, it can really stress that plant out and it can cause that plant to focus primarily on root growth instead of leaf growth. If the planter is too large and there's a lot of excess soil, then that plant is going to spend a lot of time growing new roots for a really, really long time instead of putting out leaf growth. And it's also more at risk of developing root rot because all of that excess soil could potentially become really saturated and that those roots won't have the opportunity to breathe and may get root rot. So you just want to make sure that your planter is a small enough size. Just make sure that in addition to your soil having a lot of drainage, that your pot has a lot of drainage, and try to limit repotting to the growing season if you can. And lastly, I'd say the biggest mistake that we could do as a plant parent is beating ourselves up because a plant dies, because sometimes plants just die and that's okay. None of us are perfect plant parents, and I mean, how boring would that be if we were all perfect plant parents? I mean, we'd have no stories to tell, we would have nothing to share with each other. I mean, who wants that? That would be completely boring and not interesting. So to me, it's a good thing that none of us are perfect and we all have our own interesting journeys and mistakes that we make along the way. But I hope this was helpful. And if you'd like to see other episodes showing up in your newsfeed, plant shopping, plant care, definitely subscribe. And we also have an amazing plant community on Instagram that we would love for you to be part of. And lastly, huge thank you again to rePotme.com for partnering with me on my Houseplant Care 101 series. They are such a wonderful partner. I am totally in love with them, and I definitely recommend, 10 out of 10 recommend checking out their soils and their planters. They're such a great resource. And again, don't forget, if you want to check out their soils, they are offering 10% off of their soil with my code Ashley. All right, guys, I hope you have a fabulous rest of the day. You will definitely be seeing me soon. Bye.